Is that what you're
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Excellent.
Hi there. I'm going to resume my commentary on the Rebel Wisdom discussion between John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau. And the second half of the discussion is particularly interesting to me for reasons that you'll see. It really highlights some of the things I've been thinking about, and of course the Pirsigian lens, and how that lens is so valuable to what's happening in this corner, this little corner of the internet, the sense-making web, however you want to characterize it.
That one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to help people see that, because one of the problems of this weird moment is that people see patterns, but they always see them as leading towards this hermeneutic of suspicion, like it's hiding something, and I can see behind it the true intention. Whereas what I'm trying to do is to say, here are these patterns, and they point towards this beautiful music, basically.
That's why what you're doing is so important.
So it's like, here's this pattern of reality, and here how it's musical and beautiful and will lift you up, basically. And so
that's exactly it.
That's interesting what he's saying. The pattern itself, like recognizing patterns itself, that cognitive process, or even the fully embodied process, is what we do, is how we operate in the world. But how we interpret that pattern can be very different. So Jonathan seems to be saying that there's an essential harmony, an elegance, as Poincaré put it, that emerges out of experience. And it kind of lines up with optimal grip, I guess John Vervaeke would say. And this puts us in direct contact with qualities. So however you want to describe it, Jonathan's patterns, these eternal patterns, line up with our cognition of what is good. And that goodness is harmony. These are all different ways of characterizing this phenomenon. In contrast, for just recognizing patterns but being suspicious, saying, here's a pattern and I can see what's underneath this pattern. It's in that case, we're looking at patterns because we want to win. Our highest goal is to get one over the system, let's say. So goodness is a pattern, but nefariousness is also a pattern. So pattern recognition, but what you're recognizing is extremely important. And one thing I wanted to say about this conversation, especially the earlier part, the part one, is that the whole notion of irony and suspicion reminds me of that great chat of David Foster Wallace, and I think that was with Charlie Rose, against postmodernism and the resulting skepticism. And I'll put a link to that. David Foster Wallace said basically, and this is probably, this is in the early 2000s, that irony and skepticism had run their course. Of course, he's prescient, just like these geniuses are. So what Jonathan is saying is, let's revisit these great patterns, and which expose themselves to us in these great social level narratives. That and these narratives, of course, are what gets bludgeoned by postmodernism, by irony, by skepticism, by the hermeneutics of suspicion. Because Wallace said there isn't anything tying our experience together, and this is what we're sick of. And these patterns, like knowing these patterns are always there, but learning how to recognize them, that recognition will tie our experience together in unity. That feeling that we have nothing to tie them together is the meaning crisis. So in this corner, we're trying to find that thing, and Jonathan is saying how his patterns tie our experience together. But the rest of us also are doing that through religion and or metaphysics. And I would say that the non-theists do it. I would say there's metaphysics involved in whatever your approach is. But if you're going to look at the process itself, at the metaphysical process, that is a way you can have the same kind of experience that a more religious pattern recognition evokes.
A symbol is something that has this very powerful property, right? And you are very clear, a symbol is not just a metaphor. It's not just a transpositions between propositions. And you say, no, this is what you mean, I think, by it happens, right? It's a way of getting your cognition coupled to how reality is unfolding, if I understand you. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay. So you're in this frame, and you're locked in, and a symbol, right, has the capacity to be taken into the frame, but also not belong and take people out, which is the proper this is why Kierkegaard writes under pseudonyms. It's the same thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present something to you that you're going to be initially, because if people don't take the symbol into the frame, it won't do a damn thing, right? So I'm going to make the symbol at least attractive to you, and right? But from your frame, but once you get into it, once it gets inside, it'll break things apart and it'll attract you outside your frame. It'll reverse the arrow of relevance. That's what I see you doing with symbolism.
Yeah, well, that's why I do movie interpretations.
John's saying the same thing again, that this symbol couples you to, it makes you see how reality actually unfolds. And there's a certain, I hate to use this word, but there's a certain, I was going to use the word objectivity, but there's a certain unification of our experience, which I suppose that lines up with objectivity, although we're looking at this in a more of a Jamesian sense. And with a lot of what we talk about this corner, it's important to realize that this is a very Pirsigian notion, and why Pirsig really resonated with William James, that quality, or in this case, a symbol that lines up with quality is not an object in itself. The symbolic transference out of the frame is the object itself being created. When you recognize it and it takes you out of the frame, that's a new object being created, using object, of course, in the Pirsigian sense as a pattern of value. So when you're in a frame, whatever it is, whatever static place you are, the intrusion of quality, which is spontaneous and updates your understanding of that frame, or even demolishes the frame with an insight. The symbol is more like a pattern of value, a pattern that explains our cognitive and spiritual coupling with reality, with value, with quality being the special sauce. And it stands apart from the frame enough so we can see it as a shiny thing, see it as something interesting, novel, that fascinates us. And what's happening is millennia of quality events, in a way kind of like what you could call Platonic forms, are in play in this, but it's really the form of the form, I think. So the symbol helps you make sense by coupling it to the whole mythos, to the whole millennia of quality events with that dynamic moment. So there's a relationship. It's not an analogy. It's not a metaphor. It's a relationship with the quality of all these things we've come to know up to now and what's happening right in front of you. And that is the quality event, and that is what the symbol does.
It's like I'm not a Buddhist, but I think that I'm always trying to do something like a Zen koan. That's what I'm trying to do.
And that koan moment is what draws you out of your frame, first through confusion. Well, the moment would be insight, but you're first confused, you're thrust into something that breaks up your frame. That's what the koan does, and then regroups it. The koan is kind of like a parable, but not really. It's much less explicit. It's kind of like a riddle, but not really, because it's not logical. It is, again, something to break up your frame and regroup it in something that connects you with the entire lineage of quality.
It is the fastest way to participation.
Yes.
Right? Because everybody has access to it all the time. It's actually just there in front of you. It's like right behind that first veil. And so if you're able to just get someone to have insight, it's like all of a sudden that light that goes on. It's not a change of information. It's not a propositional change of opinion. None of that is going on. It's actually, it is, the best way to say it is that there's a light that goes on, and then that light wants to shine. And then it's like, okay, now I look at the world, and the world has changed. The way that I see the world is not the same as it was. And sometimes you can't hold on to it for a very long time. Sometimes it just lasts a few seconds, because I know it. Because when I have insights, I have these insights, and then it's like, oh, no. It's like, and then it just kind of gets away. But it's like if people can have those little moments, then I think that that's one of the ways to help them get back on a path of meaning and to get back into,
The insight itself is the quality event, and in this case, of course, we're talking about people having these insights, because due to the panpsychist, let's say, nature of metaphysics of quality, interaction between patterns of any sort, inorganic, biological, etc., is when the patterns themselves interact, when these objects interact, that's a quality event. But right now we're talking about people and having, let's just say, spiritual insight or insight in itself. In a person, that insight, that quality event is going to be that pre-intellectual awareness of quality, that thing that just happens, which becomes awareness, which comes into awareness, and from that the analog is created. And by analog we mean just, just anything. This could be the next brushstroke in a painting that you're doing, or the next line in a book, or the idea for the next book, or a new understanding of a person based on actually having a conversation with him versus what you thought about him beforehand. So this analog is created, the dynamic novelty or shining forth with your awareness of it happens, and it's from that freshness that these analogs are created. So that feeling of not being able to hold on to it is a familiar one, but of course, if you have one of these experiences, even if it's elusive, even if you can't really, if you don't have the chance to make a more direct analog of it, it's still in your unconscious, and the change has happened, and it will influence you going forward. So when he says, these moments of insight, even if you're not directly creating an analog that is tangible. An analog is being created in your psyche, and the more of these, the more meaning.
Now, I think a lot of the time, people don't pursue something knowing that it's wrong or evil. Pursue something they believe it to be good. Another way of putting it is, I think people often fail not because they're pursuing something good, but because they pursue a lesser good at expense of a greater good. That's what I mean when I tweeted once. I don't tweet very much, but I'll periodically tweet these sort of, I try to be like, Epictetus, these little sort of provocative things to try and get people talking. And that's what I meant when I said, I think sin is the failure to love wisely. And I wanted to get that in as something that overlaps, but it's not the same as our notion of immorality.
If we know what quality is, then why are poor quality choices made? And this is what John is explaining here. Because remember, in Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the iconic section where he says, well, we all know what quality is because everyone knows which of these essays is the quality essay. And so a question that's often asked is, well, if quality is the driving factor of the creation of the universe, then why are there so many bad things? Why are bad choices made? So the failure to love wisely kind of sums it up, to be misguided, and we can go into this quite a bit, and they do go into this in this conversation. Morality itself is composed of patterns of value, and value itself happens, but value may not be influenced more by morality, or it may. There is a moral determination in every quality decision, but the whole sum total of morality in a certain level, let's just say social morality, the morality we think of, the choices may not necessarily be influenced by that. So that's another factor.
Yeah, and that's what Dante treats completely in his Commedia. That's the way he sees sin, is exactly that. It's always love that's driving.
So I guess Dante needs to be added to the corner canon now. I mean, Pageau's been mentioning him a lot, so put that on the list. Corner canon text, the canon of the corner, the texts.
And it's the poetic spirit which made Dante possible that he could know what love is. And then Beatrice is what awakened love in him.
Yes.
But then that love was never sufficient, and then the higher beings up to into the Virgin ends up being this ascent. The very ascent that he's doing from hell all the way to heaven is an ascent of hierarchies of love. And so it's like as if the very way in which the people that come see him represent in his own life what those hierarchies of loves are, that they're all good, right? That the love for poetry is good, but everybody knows, right, the stuffy professor who like reads poetry but is completely asocial and can't have relationships. And so, but you know the person who is in love with a person but becomes so obsessed with that person that they lose themselves in their relationship, right? So you know that all these loves kind of stack up. And I just find it so powerful to realize how powerfully he kind of, and then when he goes up, it's not exactly the same, but he goes to Bernard of Clairvaux, who is like the theoretician of love in the Middle Ages, and ultimately into the Virgin as this ultimate image, and ultimately into the non-duality of God himself. So anyway, I just think that it's a great place to look for that, because I think the whole commedia is organized that way.
One thing they're going to talk about now, and for the rest of the dialogue, and for a lot of the dialogue that follows, is that love or value occurs at different levels. And depending on what level you're at, there is an intrusion of good into whatever is at hand, whatever is happening, the quality event. And a new pattern of value establishes itself in analog to what came before. As we go up the levels, the highest level isn't, let's just say, as he said, that non-dualistic, at some point he says non-dualistic sensibility of God. The highest level is an open-ended connection with the highest of all, open-ended, direct line. And as far as human beings are concerned, we have as our highest level, how it manifests in us is a full person connection with God. And that means all of our levels, biological, social, intellectual needs, each which have their own value system, which have their own morality, on their own level, line up and are in service to the highest, let's say. So I think one example might be, and I don't know if this is a feasible example for everyone, it's not. That means all our levels, biological, social, intellectual needs, each which have their own value system on their own level, line up, are in service to the highest. Now, what would be a good example of that? I'm not sure. On the one hand, you have, the ascetics subsume their biological level for a higher purpose. That probably is the highest form of lining your biological level up with service to the highest good, but I don't think you have to do that to be a holy person, let's say. And maybe you have to do that to be a holy person, but you don't have to do that to be a good person. So if your love for poetry is only intellectual, and you miss that poetry describes and connects to the social level, then that misses the mark. It is not in service to the highest good. So even though poetry is a high quality pattern of value, a high quality form of art, if you are seeing that as purely an intellectual exercise and you ignore everything else, you ignore your social connections, and how poetry helps you understand those social connections and helps you connect, then that's not as high. That's not as high and participation in that pattern of value that it could be. In fact, our problem today is that people who believe ideas are the highest good are fighting people who think social values are the highest good. And neither side is right, because both of them are finding their value in one level. So if you don't incorporate or respect the entire panoply of levels, everything that's come before, you're building your valuable objects on sand. In Dante, this seems to represent what it's like to maintain that harmony as the value of that love, that through line increases.
And that, this isn't an insult to Dante, I think he would like it. That structure is actually given, that's the structure given in the Symposium.
Okay, add the Symposium to the canon. The works of Plato, definitely. And it's Plato who's a unifying figure for both Jonathan and John. And as I proposed in my conversation with John, a rediscovery of Neoplatonism and the enduring legacy of Neoplatonism can really help bridge this gap between Christianity and the non-theistic desire for transcendency. And that is a big concern of the corner. So corner concerns and corner canon, two ripe topics for our projects.
And if I get you wrong, please correct me. But you were saying, no, faith is this, you're at this level and you love it, but there's something in it that love also draws you to something higher, and then you get to a gestalt that, right, you can't infer from the lower level, but once you're there, and this is the Kierkegaardian leap too, I think.
And it's like a call. You can feel it like a call,
yes.
and that's what is the call. It's a call to faith, I guess.
And right, but Plato has that love is always metaxu. Love is always a call, right? Love is always a call beyond what is, and so it seems. So this is what I'm trying to understand what you said. You're at this level. Love is being instantiated, embodied, incarnated, whatever word you want, there, and that is a good. But then the love also issues a call, because eros is always in between the human and the divine. That's right. And then if you follow the call, if you are willing to fall in love, you fall upwards into a gestalt that then makes sense of the lower level. And so you can always, in reverse, justify having taken the leap, but you can never justify before you take the leap. Am I understanding you correctly?
I totally. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about, it's funny that you talk about the symposium, because I think that in the symposium all this is happening in multiple levels, and that the scene with Alcibiades and Socrates.
Yes.
That's like the best. It's like the best scene, because Alcibiades is trying to seduce Socrates, and Socrates is trying to basically engage with him enough so that his desire remains active, and then lift his desire up towards something more.
In the context of what they're saying here, even the metaphysics of quality view of the levels, this call is towards something akin to the static latch, the strong emergence of something that is subsequently irreducible. For example, the human social level emerging out of the biological, in the big picture way of looking at the levels. And at that new level, it will have its own morality, a lot like Dante, which I've only read in high school, so I got to get back into that. I got to read that again. It seems that starting in hell and going up to heaven is similar in a sense, and this is a little awkward, so I'm not sure if I really have a coherent picture of this, but it's sort of like starting at the biological level, and the dark side of the biological level is what you could characterize as satanic. Evil very often is when biological needs are put first, all the way up to the intellectual level, which is most connected with God, let's say Neoplatonism, that's falling upwards. So Socrates engages Alcibiades at the biological level in order to pull him up to the transcendent level. It's a little disjointed, but I'm trying to make some relationships.
It's also one of the problems of pride. It's like, if that's the problem of not being able to rise up to the next level, is pride, because pride appears as self-sufficiency. It appears as self-naming.
Oh, yes.
And so it's like, I've got it, and I master this, and I see myself as the pinnacle of something. So it's a lot harder to jump up the next level when you master one level. Let's say, not that you master it too much, but that you take it as self-sufficient, and then it's hard to go up. So that's why humility is always part of this process.
Yeah, it has to be.
Right. So the idea is that humility makes it possible for the call to lift you up.
I think humility and wonder, because wonder always gets you to challenge the self-sufficiency of any framing that you're in.
Yeah, but because it's actually the lower level is impossible of being resolved at that level. And so the idea that you master it in that level, it has to be pride, because it cannot be resolved. It has to, in order for it to be resolved, it has to reach the gestalt.
Say more what you mean by, I think I understand what you mean by.
Right, so, okay, so yeah, I'm trying to find the best example. Like, am I going for an object or for a human process? Let's go for an object. It's like the gestalt of the glass cannot be resolved by the different elements of the glass.
Yes.
Right. And so, if one element of the glass or some aspect of one level thinks that it masters everything, that it's got it, that it completely owns this thing, it's lying. It does it. It's not possible. Right. And so,
Can I try something?
Yeah, go for it, go for it.
Okay. So, and again, we were talking about this yesterday, but I think it's completely appropriate. So I've been trying to get to a way of making phenomenologically viable and powerful the Platonic notion of the form, because it seems like it's been turned into this abstract thing. And so there's this idea that, right, and I'm trying, and other people are doing this, not just me. John Russo's doing an amazing job, having a huge influence on me. But the idea that, and this is from Merleau-Ponty, we never actually see something, right? Because we can't see all of its aspects. And beyond the perceptible aspects, there's conceptual, there's imaginal aspects, right? You know, this could be used as a hat, right? Yeah. Oh, well, right, all that. So there's all these, this multi-aspectuality, and yet it's not a cacophony. It's harmony. It's like a melody of music. There's a through line that runs through all the aspects. And the through line, and this is where Merleau-Ponty I think is better than Husserl, because Husserl thinks he can find the essence as a completion or something like that, the reduction. I don't want to get into the scholastic arguments about that, but Merleau-Ponty says no, this is inexhaustible. Right? The through line is right. It's like Tolkien, Ilúvatar, sings, yeah, right, the song of reality. So that through line is not itself an aspect. Right? It's, yeah, not, because it's that which can bind all possible aspects together.
Exactly.
Right.
The pride he's talking about is that desire to close in a system because you believe it's beneficial to you, because you believe that this self-sufficiency means you've arrived. You've got it. You've arrived and you don't need to do any more work, and there's a certainty to it. And this is, pride is sort of a pride and the desire for certainty seem to me to be really related, and the desire and certainty, like finding certainty when there's never certainty, is the gist of a lot of problems. So if you're trying to prevent outside influences from changing the status quo, creating an immune system, let's say, to keep ideas out, that's pride. Like when an institution becomes corrupt because it won't allow for the influx of dynamic quality, and you see this all the time. When a corporation, it starts as a great little company, and then it becomes this monumental corporation that's just about profit, and it will do whatever it can for profit, and it closes in that system. And a lot of bad stuff happening in the world is because of that. So when an institution becomes corrupt because it won't allow that influx of dynamic quality, that novelty that updates the system. So look at our political division, for example. The bubbles are these closed systems, and the bubbles are of conservative pride or liberal pride, roughly. And what both sides need is a little of the other, right? Yin-yang is the way. Yin-yang. So that word humility is critical to the approach we're taking in this corner. And it's sort of an antidote to what happened, let's say, with the intellectual dark web, which they talk about in Rebel Wisdom. So the intellectual dark web started as something really dynamic and wonderful, and an antidote to, some of the problems that were happening with this burgeoning political divide that we see now. But the problem with the intellectual dark web is it kind of played into that division. Dave Rubin was a perfect example. He was such an interesting and open classical liberal, this gay guy who had sort of some traditional values, and that was very fresh. It was very refreshing, and it looked like this was going to go in a really good way. But the pride of being a monetary and popular success influenced him to really double down on taking a side. And taking an intellectual side means that you think that, that side gets it. So there's not going to be any reaching that next level, that static latching, that new emergence, that gestalt, without that openness. You're just going to kind of be swimming around, and maybe you'll make a ton of money. Sure, you can. I mean, that's another way that, like having money at the top of your hierarchy versus God, mammon instead of God, is going to keep you stuck in these systems and keeping out dynamic quality because your concern is profit. So the Platonic form isn't a form, it's a process. Or at least we need to try to understand it that way I think, and like the perfect horse, let's say, because they always bring up hoarseness as a form. It isn't exactly a beautiful form of a perfect horse a priori floating out there. It's the quality of the beautiful horse, the quality that we recognize as beautiful. And it's the process of valuing, and the through line is quality. So later we can say, so here's a picture of a beautiful horse, but that picture of the beautiful horse is based on many people's input over the course of millennia, not that a priori horse. And as evolution goes forward, biological evolution goes forward, that understanding of what a perfect horse may change. That's not a great example because, we're not going to see any change like that in our lifetime. Although if you look back at prehistoric horses, the perfect horse was a much smaller size. And this is where William James comes back into it, that pragmatic beauty, the form of what is beautiful at this time, with everything that's come forward and dynamic quality influencing it. So William James, of course, is another author for the corner canon. So the through line is quality, the creative force of everything.
Right, so that's why it's a form and not something you see. Although the word eidos actually means the look of something. Yeah. It means a particular so he's trying to play with aspectuality, and then of course you increase that when you do dialogos, because then you get multiple perspectives, each with multiple aspectuality. Yeah.
Dialogos mimics this millennia-long process and ever-present process. They're both the same thing. Together in a dialogos, we are valuing together and creating. So it is like the process we're talking about in action.
Right, and it gets layered in this, and what's the form going through all of that? And,
good as a noun.
It's wonderful, right? But what I was going to say is, right, is the lower level, when any aspect thinks it captures the through line, and thereby enters into a kind of profound category mistake, because no aspect can be the through line.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it, and that's what you could say. That's pride. That's when you say pride before the fall. Like right. That's what pride is, and that is, you could say, that's the origin of sin. That's when you miss the mark, right? Because the mark is beyond.
The mark is the through line.
Yeah, and so if you think that you've got it here, then you missed it. You're not aiming. Yeah. You're not aiming properly. It has to move up across the categories, across the level, to enter into this gestalt.
So again, this explains how you can sense quality, but if you're only favoring one level, and especially putting the needs of a lower level above the needs of a higher level and not in harmony with all levels, moving towards dynamic quality together, you've missed the mark. The object of your love will be of lower quality.
But the Gestalt does, because it's just stories, right, in my mind. So the Gestalt in the stories, it always appears at this level. Yeah. But if you see it in the stories, what it'll appear as is always something like a glimmer, or like a seed, or like a golden something, a golden ball, a golden, like a little thing, a small, like when Christ talks about it, he said, the smallest thing, the seed, the smallest, the mustard seed, you can't see it, it has no substantiality, right? So it has to do with and even has to do with the idea, in a way, of the geometric point, right? The idea of the in a space, the geometric center of a circle has no position in the circle. It doesn't have space. But it's there.
Yeah, Nicholas.
So it appears as this glimmer, as this thing.
Okay. So
that is so interesting. It describes the experience of valuing, of the intrusion of dynamic quality. The analogy of the golden ball or the seed packed with potential to create something better, to draw you out of where you are, mirrors that great metaphysical symbol that that is old as mankind, probably, that describes this pattern of valuing. It's that center point that creates the circle, the dynamic quality that holds the pattern of valuing together, that holds the circle together, that holds the pattern together.
That brings me to, then, I want to join two things we've been talking about. Okay, it seems to me that glimmer is, right, like you said, there's somehow in which the Gestalt is glimmering, shining into the lower level, right? And that is, if that, to me, that lines up with what we were saying earlier about what the symbol is.
Yeah.
And that, so there's a relationship between faith and the ability to see symbolically.
I think so. Because you can't, I think you're right. And that's why I frame it that way, because it's like the symbol, the gathering, the manner in which the pattern gathers into this unity, it's like that, it kind of pulls you out.
Yes.
And it pulls you up, you could say. Because it also, because if you're able to help people see think about this. So if you're able to help people see a pattern as something, and help them see that there's a pattern, the through line. Yeah. And then you can help them see like that pattern can be applied to something which is not at all in this category.
Yes.
Then it pulls them out. It has to.
Yes.
Right. So it's like you could think of it like, here's a pattern of being, here's a pattern of action. We call this pattern, affection. And so you can see, it's a bunch of things, right? It's a tap on the shoulder. It's like, what is this? It's a kiss on the cheek. Like, what are these things that we're touching each other? Yeah. Like, what is that? But you see that there's a pattern going through, and this pattern has a reality. It's effective. If I can help you see the pattern, then I'm pulling you up, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's affection, that's affection, that's affection. And of course it's organic, it's messy. Sometimes it can slip or whatever. But I think that there's something about that.
You mentioned faith and beauty.
Yeah.
There's kind of an aesthetic sense to faith.
Yeah,
or it's deeply entwined with that aesthetic.
Yeah, there's an aesthetics to it, but I want to do these two conversations are like growing together in my mind. The one we had yesterday and the one, but. See, with Kant and the three critiques, and this is, I think, a central point that Habermas made, we separated the true, the good, and the beautiful. We separated them into autonomous regions. And because the ultimate sacredness in the Enlightenment is autonomy. Autonomous reason is Kant. Right? But anyways, and I think that is one of the besetting things of the meaning crisis.
Number 17, and of course that mirrors a lot what Pirsig said at the end of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The problem began when it was decided by the philosophers to make arete, right hemisphere, gestalt, holistic, subservient to truth, left brain, analytical, fragmentation, then truth opened the door for endless analysis and endless fragmentation, and threw away the holistic frame that it was in. And that's where we are. So that was a great conversation, and I hope that made sense, and I will see you next time.